Alright guys, so now it's time to implement Redux in our application. So first of all, we need to install a few different things. So I'm going to go to my terminal. I'm going to actually go to my second terminal here, and we're going to install some stuff. Okay, so make sure you're in your client folder because you want to be in your React application. And we're going to do npm install, and we want to install Redux. We want to install React-Redux. And we want to install Redux-Thunk. All right, now Redux is obviously the Redux state management system. Now you can use Redux outside of React as well. It's not necessarily for React. It just works really well with React because we have the awesome React Redux library, which kind of glues everything together. Okay, and then Redux-Thunk is actually a piece of middleware that we're going to use it's kind of hard to explain, but when we make an AJAX request, we want to wait for that request and then dispatch to our reducer, and Redux-Thunk allows us to do that. Okay, and we'll talk more about that as we go along. So let's install these three things. All right, so now that that's all installed, I'm just going to go back to my other terminal where I have the servers running. And we want to start in our app.js. This is basically like the meeting place for our front end. And we want to import something from React Redux, which is the library that basically binds the two together. So we want to say import provider. Okay, so provider, and that's going to be from React-Redux. Now, provider is actually a React component, and it provides our application with the store, which holds the state, okay, which holds all of our data, and it has to wrap around everything. All right, so what we need to do is go down to our main app components render. Inside the return, you see we have the router. We actually want to wrap this around even the router. Okay, so we're going to say provider. We're going to end it down here like that, and we'll go ahead and tab that over. Now the provider is going to take in our store. Okay, so we're going to say provider store equals store. All right, now right now we'll get an error because it doesn't know what this store variable is. Now to create our store, there's actually a method that we use called create store, and I'm just going to show you that real quick. All right, so this create store takes in three things. It takes in a reducer. Now, as I said before, we're going to have multiple reducers. We'll have an auth reducer for authentication. We'll have a profile reducer, a post reducer, and I also want to have an error reducer. Now, you want to combine these together. So there's actually a method called combine reducers where we can pass in all of our sub reducers. All right, but we want to pass in the root reducer, which is going to basically contain all of our sub reducers into create store. All right, the next one is the preloaded state, so any initial state that you want to add. And then we also have enhancers, okay, and this is where we actually apply our middleware. We're also going to apply our Redux Chrome extension here as well so that we can use that. All right, so just to get this to actually work without getting errors, we can actually say const store and set this equal to create store, and for now we can just simply pass in an empty function, and we're just going to put in an empty array here as our reducer, root reducer, then our initial state, which will be an empty object, and then apply middleware. Okay, now it doesn't know what apply middleware and create store actually is, because you don't see that up here anywhere. These are actually from Redux. Okay, so these are part of Redux, so we would import here create store and apply middleware from Redux. All right, so let's go ahead and save that. And let's see if our application still works. And it does. Okay, so we're not getting any errors, but it's not actually doing anything. Now, as far as our store goes, we're not going to want to put everything in this file. Okay, so what we're going to do is create a separate store file, and we're going to put that right in the source, okay, inside client source. So let's say new file, we'll call it store.js. And instead of bringing in this create store and apply middleware here, let's put it inside of our store. And let's also take this, cut that out, and put that inside of our store as well. And then we simply want to export store like that, or I'm sorry, export default store, and save. And then we want to just import that file into our app.js. So let's see, we'll put this, let's put it right under the provider. So we'll say import store from, and it's just going to be /store. All right, so we still should get no errors. If we reload, good. So in our store, let's continue with this, because right now this isn't doing anything. It's just basically just an empty store. There's no middleware being applied or anything. So let's bring in our Thunk middleware. So we're going to say import Thunk, and when we use this, I'll show you what it's actually doing. But we want to import this from Redux-Thunk, and then we want to go to our apply middleware. And actually, you know what I'm going to do is create a variable right here called middleware, and set this to an array, and we're just going to put in Thunk. Okay, and then over here in apply middleware, we're just going to use the spread operator. I always forget what that's called, the 3 dots, and then say middleware. Okay, so we're going to bring in Thunk, and then any other middleware that we want, we could just add to this array. All right, so that takes care of the middleware. Now remember, the first parameter is your reducer, your root reducer. So we need to create that. So let's create a folder in our source called reducers. And inside here, we're going to create a file called index.js. This is our root reducer. This is where we want to basically bring in all of our other reducers. Okay, so let's see. So in here, we'll go ahead and import something called combine reducers. And it's possible to just have one reducer that we could write in here, but we want, for the size of our application, we need multiple reducers. So we want to import that from Redux. That's part of Redux. All right, and then we're going to start off with authentication. So let's say import auth reducer, which we haven't created yet, but we will. And that's going to be from, and it's going to be stored in the same folder, and it's going to be called auth reducer. Okay, now what we want to do is just export default, no parentheses, combine reducers, or yeah, this should actually be reducers. And then in here, we simply put an object with our reducers. All right, now we can call it whatever we want. I'm going to call it auth and set it to the auth reducer. All right, now when we use anything from our auth reducer in our components, we'll use this.props.auth. Okay, if we want to call an action or something like that, or get the properties, you have to remember this right here, whatever you use here. Okay, and when we create our other reducers like the profile, the post, we'll bring those in, and we'll also include them here in this object. But that's all that we need to do in this file, is just basically combine our reducers. So now in the reducers folder, let's create a new file called authreducer.js. what I'm going to do is just create an initial state for our auth reducer. So let's set this to an object. We're going to have is authenticated set to false, and we're going to have user set to just an empty object. Okay, remember when I showed you the Redux extension in Chrome, you saw this? Well, this is the initial state for our reducer. Now every reducer is going to export a function. So we're going to say export default function. And trust me, you'll get the hang of this more as we move along, because we're going to be dealing with this quite a bit. All right, now this function is going to take in your initial state. So we're going to say state equals initial state, which we just created. And then it's also going to take in an action. All right, because we're going to dispatch actions to this reducer. And then this is where we do the testing. So the way that we test is with a switch. Okay, just a standard JavaScript switch. And the action is an object that's going to include a type. Okay, it has to at least include a type. You can also send a payload. You can send data along with it. And then you want to test cases. So for instance, if we wanted to set the current user, then we would say, let's say they logged in and the user needs to be set. We could say set current user like that, and then we could go ahead and return our modified version of the state, which would include the user. And we actually will have this action type, but we'll get to that in a little bit. For now, we're just going to have the default case, which is just going to return the state as is. Okay, that's always going to be our default. So this is all we really need for right now. So let's save it, and let's go back to our store. And now let's bring in our root reducer. So we'll say import root reducer from /reducers. We can do /reducers because we called our root reducer index.js, so we don't actually have to put index.js. Okay, now instead of just this right here, we can replace it with our root reducer like that. All right, and as far as the initial state, I'm not going to have any initial state for our create store. So what I'll do is I am going to put it into a variable, just set it like that, and then pass an initial state, just to make it a little bit neater. All right, so that looks good. If we save this, let's make sure we have no errors or anything. And we're still not doing anything yet. We're just setting up. We're just basically setting up the boilerplate for Redux, setting up our store. Now, the last thing I want to do in this video is implement the Redux DevTools extension, because right now, if we take a look at it, and you should already have this installed, it's going to basically tell us to follow some instructions. Okay, you can click on this if you want to check it out, but we're going to just go ahead and do what it's going to tell us to do. Basically, we need to add that into this third parameter here. Now, we also want to call we also want to call apply middleware. So we need to bring in something called compose from Redux. So we're going to go up here and we're going to say compose. We want to bring that in. And then instead of just putting apply middleware here, we're going to say compose. And then we're going to actually bring the apply middleware. Let me just grab it. We're going to bring that into compose. All right, we don't want this semicolon. So we want to go like that. Let's fix this up a little bit. Okay, so we have our apply middleware. Now, in addition to this, we want to put a comma here, and then I'm going to go on to the next line. Actually, let's push that down. Let's push this down. So on this next line here is where we need to implement the Redux DevTools. So we need to say window dot, and this is what if you follow that link, this is what it's going to tell you to do. Double underscore Redux underscore DevTools underscore extension underscore, or double underscore, sorry, and then we want to do a space double ampersand window dot double underscore Redux DevTools extension double underscore. Whoops, it already had a double underscore. And then parentheses. And I know that looks kind of weird, but that's what it needs for it to implement the extension and show us what we need to see. All right, so let's save this. And let's go ahead and see if this actually works now. So we'll go over, and now you can see it's working. All right, now if we click on state, there it is. There's auth is authenticated is false, and user is just a blank object. All right, we haven't implemented any logic to change this or to log in or to do any of that yet, but we now know that Redux is set up, and we have a reducer. We have an auth reducer, which doesn't yet have any cases for our switch except for the default, which just returns the initial state. Okay, if I were to add something else to the initial state, like, I don't know, let's just say hello and set that to a string of test, and go back to our extension here, and we look at state, under auth we have hello test. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Obviously we don't want this, but that's it. Now that we have this Redux in our store initialized, we can move along. Now, one thing that we haven't done yet is created an actions folder. We're going to do that next because we want to be able to register a user through an action. Okay, so we'll do that in the next video.